You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
Have you said thank you once? This entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing.
We are continuing to follow the fallout from that contentious meeting at the White House between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, President Trump, and other top U.S. officials. Since that Friday blow-up, the U.S. has threatened to end arms shipments to Ukraine. One of the president's top advisors, Elon Musk, agreed that the U.S. should leave NATO, and now a spokesman for the Kremlin saying President Trump's foreign policy largely aligns with its vision. Joining us to discuss this and more, Julia Manchester, national political reporter here at The Hill. Julia, President Trump is out with this Truth Social post today, blasting Zelensky for saying that a deal to end the war was very far away. Trump said this is the worst statement that could have been made by Zelensky, and America will not put up with it for much longer. There are reports of a meeting happening this afternoon at the White House regarding the path forward in Ukraine. What do we know about that?
Well, look, we know that President Trump is going to have this meeting with officials going forward. Clearly, the White House was very much, on alert, responding to a lot of the, foreign response we saw from the meeting. Remember, we saw Zelensky leave from Washington to go to Europe, meet with a number of European leaders, and you also saw a number of European leaders posting very public shows of support for Zelensky. So I think from the Trump administration's perspective, yes, they want to take this America First approach, but they also need to keep in mind how they're communicating and talking with their European allies going forward, because they're tied into this as well. Zelensky made this point, Drew, on Friday that the U.S. might not feel the effects of the Ukraine war because we have this ocean between us, but eventually we will. The Europeans feel the effect of the war much more greatly. So it'll be interesting to see how this meeting, the Trump administration is able to address what's happening with European allies and how they're approaching this.
Is there a feeling in Washington that Friday blow-up was just a blip in the negotiations, kind of the sausage making of foreign policy being done out in the open as Trump may like it? Or is the feeling in Washington that something has fundamentally changed in the relationship?
I get the sense something has fundamentally changed. And it was interesting last week because it was a series of events. Remember that Monday, as French President Emmanuel Macron was meeting with Trump in Washington, you saw up in New York City at the United Nations, the U.S. siding with Russia, Sudan, North Korea to vote against a resolution that would have condemned Russia for its role in starting the war in Ukraine. So we kind of already got a sneak peek into that things were definitely changing. We saw the rhetoric changing, but things seem to definitely be on that course. Then on Thursday, though, when Keir Starmer was there, the British Prime Minister with President Trump denied ever calling Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator, and he clearly very publicly did. So we thought, oh, maybe his language is softening. That didn't happen. Yes, it was absolutely negotiating foreign policy out in the open. Trump's allies would say Zelensky was the one that started it, doing it in front of the press, negotiating this in front of the eyes of the world. But at the same time, I think the blow-up we've seen is nothing we've ever seen before.
It does seem like the partisan shift has continued as a result of that blow-up at the meeting. The online right has become decidedly anti-Zelensky, a continuation of a pattern that we've seen over the last few years. Even Republican Lindsey Graham, who's been a staunch supporter of Ukraine and Zelensky, saying that Zelensky needed to apologize or even consider resigning. Chris Murphy, the Democratic senator, says the White House is now an arm of the Kremlin. What do you think are the implications of this issue becoming even more partisan?
Well, for Lindsey Graham, Zelensky could have lost a major ally among Republicans. Lindsey Graham is someone who is a Ukraine hawk, very pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia or more critical of Russia, but Graham seemed to be very upset at what he said was, President Zelensky's behavior in the Oval Office. I mean, he's been in touch with Zelensky, and we kind of got the sense that they've been working with him as to how to approach this, and they feel that he essentially kind of went off the rails in that meeting. Now, Democrats would say it was Trump and Vice President Vance that went off the rails and started that. So we're already seeing these partisan lines drawn. I will say, though, there are some Republicans, Congressman Mike Lawler from New York, Congressman Don Bacon from Nebraska, they have both pushed back a little bit on this anti-Ukraine sort of more sympathetic language
Senator
toward
Langford
Russia.
from Oklahoma
Yes.
over the weekend
Yeah,
as well.
we are seeing some of that, but decidedly under Trump, this party has become more critical of Ukraine. I don't want to say pro-Russian, but the rhetoric is certainly softer on Moscow.
You talked about Zelensky meeting with European leaders over the weekend. I want to take a listen to British Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting. But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong US backing.
So on one hand there you have Starmer saying we got to be willing to step up. On the other hand saying we can't really do it without the United States.
Right.
What do you make of the response in Europe to the latest developments here in the U.S.?
I thought the way Keir Starmer approached this before the blow-up on Friday when he was in the U.S., Starmer was in the U.S. on Thursday, was really fascinating, and it might seem trivial, but I think it's actually really important. Keir Starmer delivered a handwritten invitation from King Charles III for President Trump to visit the U.K. That's important because we know that President Trump loves pomp and circumstance and pageantry. He loves the royal family. He likes them. Likes it when people roll out the red carpet for him. So this is, in many ways, a charm offensive for Keir Starmer and the UK. And then, of course, he saw over the weekend, yesterday, actually on Sunday, the King Charles meet with Volodymyr Zelensky and take a picture with him. So I think the way the British have been approaching this is actually very interesting because they know what will make President Trump tick. They know that, what could potentially bring him back to the table, or at least, for more of a conversation. But overall, I think the sentiment in Europe is very concerned because the U.S., this has been a complete and total shift in U.S. foreign policy, from the Biden administration being very pro-Ukraine to this very soft on Russia stance.
And some major questions about the capacity of Europe to keep boots on the ground in a peacekeeping capacity over the long term in that area. But we'll leave it at that. Julia Manchester, national political reporter, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
Stars hit the red carpet Sunday night for the 97th Oscar Awards, but amid the glitz and glam of the night, there were tributes to the firefighters who helped battle the Palisades and Eaton fires earlier this year, and some more political moments from people on stage. To break down the key moments from Hollywood's biggest night, we're bringing in The Hill's Judy Kurtz. Judy, let's start with the Best Documentary winner. The film is called No Other Land, and it documents the destruction of a town on the southern edge of the West Bank amid the ongoing war in Gaza. The creatives behind the film used their win last night to speak out against U.S. foreign policy in the region. Walk us through what they said and why it made waves in Hollywood last night.
Yeah, Drew, this is an interesting one because No Other Land is now an Oscar winner, but here in the U.S., a lot of folks couldn't even see it because it couldn't land a distributor. That being said, the filmmakers behind the documentary did take to the stage when they won the award, the Best Documentary Award, to say that there's a different political path, that the U.S. is blocking this path that veers away from ethnic supremacy. And it was really notable because it was a night when a lot of performers and presenters really tiptoed around making any blatant political statements. This was an award show that has been criticized in the past by President Trump, when a lot of performers have tended to use the Oscar stage as a way to speak out against him and his administration's policies. We didn't hear much of that last night.
A couple of shots taken at President Trump over the war in Ukraine as well, referring to the Best Picture winner, Anora, which follows a woman's marriage to the son of a Russian oligarch. Host Conan O'Brien said Americans were excited to see somebody finally stand up to a powerful Russian. Of course, this comes after the controversial Oval Office dress down of the Ukrainian president on Friday. The Oscars is often a platform for political speech, sometimes through satire, other times through advocacy. How much of that did we see last night?
We saw a little bit of it last night, and it seems like it's the new way that celebrities in left-leaning Hollywood are speaking out against President Trump by not naming him. And I wrote about this recently, how Hollywood is giving Trump this kind of Voldemort treatment. Of course, he's the villain from the Harry Potter books that most of the characters are so fearful of that they don't say his name, he who shall not be named. And that's kind of what we're seeing now with Trump, typically outspoken outspoken members of Hollywood who have criticized very fiercely President Trump not doing that as much. Instead, they're targeting his policies, but not mentioning him by name.
All right, Judy Kurtz, that's all I have for you. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Drew.
Take a look at this video. Firefighters in both North Carolina and South Carolina continue to work to contain more than 170 separate wildfires that broke out over the weekend, threatening homes and causing mass evacuations. Those fires, fueled by gusty winds and below average rainfall this year, the largest of the fires tore through 1,600 acres just west of the popular Myrtle Beach and burned down about 75 homes. Georgia also reporting at least 137 wildfires over the weekend. Those fires come nearly 2 months after several wildfires tore through Southern California. Now Governor Gavin Newsom says he is suspending environmental laws to help speed up prevention efforts. The move follows President Trump's harsh criticism of the state's wildfire management. News Nation's Nancy Liu joins us from Los Angeles with the latest.
Well, the governor's declaration of a state of emergency will fast-track the removal of vegetation and trees to prevent wildfire destruction like this. And it follows harsh criticism by President Trump about the state's wildfire and forest management. Suspension of the state's Environmental Quality Act and Coastal Act means rebuilding can happen without time-consuming analysis or mitigation work to protect the land or coast from the impact of such work. The decision comes amid widespread warnings to stay out of the waters from Malibu down to Santa Monica due to toxic conditions and fire debris. Waves of ash and debris have been building for weeks since the fires. In announcing the suspension of the environmental acts, the governor stressed a push to still build back smarter.
So it's very limited in scope and its focus with a high level of energy and commitment to the issue of rebuilding smarter, rebuilding with resiliency and climate and science in mind, rebuilding with redundancy, rebuilding with a much more aggressive posture to address the inevitability that there are going to be large-scale fires in and around the region into the future.
As for forest management, the governor's emergency declaration will mean more controlled burns in California forests, along with creation of more fuel breaks, though critics have repeatedly noted that more than half of the state's forests are federal land, and with recent DOGE cuts, there are fewer federal employees keeping an eye on all of it. On another front, Governor Newsom is asking Congress for an additional $40 billion in aid to help with the Los Angeles fire recovery. Meantime, according to the Wall Street Journal, a sell-off is underway with over 80 listings of decimated land plots here in Pacific Palisades, as well as Altadena, hitting the market since mid-February. They're being listed at about the same amount as what the properties were worth before the fire. The buyers are mostly small and mid-sized real estate investors and developers who will likely flip the vacant lots or build single-family homes to sell. And these early sales are the first signs that some residents are deciding to leave the area for good, but they also indicate that these areas are still desirable and prices could rise even more over time. Drew?
News Nation's Nancy Liu, thank you. And that's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.